everybody, to the Superhumanistic Podcast, where we talk about all things health and wellness. Thank you for joining us again this week. And make sure that you follow us on Instagram, on YouTube. Hit that follow button on this podcast so you never miss another episode. Just a little bit of a recap. From last week, we talked about anti-aging. So if you want to learn about all the great ways to prevent aging internally and externally so that you look better and feel better, make sure you go back and check out that episode. This week, we're going to be talking about processed foods. We're going to tell you about the health risk associated with eating a lot of processed foods. We're also going to tell you what to look for when it comes to identifying those processed foods, and also some healthy alternatives. So do you want to get started with a little bit of background information?
Yeah. So really processed foods, I know we hear processed foods and right away our minds are like, oh my gosh, that's bad. Why are they talking about processed foods? Not every processed food is actually bad for us. Processed foods, really what that means is that the food has been somehow processed somehow altered throughout the process of coming to our tables, right? So whether that be they're frozen, they're put in a can, those are also processed foods. So not all processed foods are really bad for you. Getting frozen vegetables is actually, I think, a really good thing. Same with frozen fruit. Sometimes it's actually healthier that way. So not all processed foods, when we hear processed foods, is actually bad. Some examples of processed foods then would be like your breakfast cereals that you eat or may eat. Cheeses are processed. Those tinned vegetables, breads processed, meat products are even processed, especially like bacon, sausage, ham, salami.
Deli meats.
Yeah, a lot of the deli meats are processed.
And has those carcinogens, so make sure you watch your intake of deli meat.
Exactly. Microwave meals obviously are processed. Cakes, biscuits, again, processed foods, and then milk and soft drinks are also processed. So again, not all processed foods are bad for you. So milk, for instance, I know you drink milk at least.
I drink whole milk.
Yeah, whole milk.
Try to get organic whole milk.
Yeah.
That's what I like to drink because whole milk is actually the least processed of milk. So there are some health benefits to drinking almond milk, coconut milk, those type of things. Mm-hmm. But keep in mind that those are very processed as well.
Yep, exactly. So looking for like the least amount of processed foods. So milk again is an example of a good processed food. Like we do need it to be processed for us to be able to drink it and not like get sick, but you want to make sure like it's coming with the least process, if that makes sense. High fiber foods. So like high fiber breakfast meals are actually, although yes, they are processed, again, they're not as processed, so they're better for you. Looking for like whole meal breakfasts or breads, and lower fat yogurts, even lower fat like cottage cheese, like those cheeses, seeing what has the lowest of fat. So with that, what we need to look out for as we're going shopping, I know I wasn't taught this, but learned this throughout my shopping years, that generally keeping to the outside of the grocery store is the best, because those foods are going to be the least processed actually. So if you think about, even as I think about going through our local grocery store here, usually it's the veggies, the fruits that are all on the outside of the store. You will have some of your meats and deli products there, but generally it's the better of the foods are on the outside of the store. Once you get into like the middle sections of your store, that's where you're getting into the more highly processed foods.
Also, just to touch on that, I think there's some psychological factors to that as well as to why grocery stores set it up that way. It's because you're making all your decisions there about those vegetables and healthier meals And as you make your way through the grocery store towards the middle and the end, then your decision making weakens and you typically start grabbing those unhealthy foods as you get closer to the register. Another reason why they have kind of a lot of cakes or candies or anything like that towards the cash register for those impulse buys, because your decision-making process has weakened by then. Maybe we'll cover that on another episode in more detail, but just a little insight there to think about as well as you walk through the grocery store.
Yeah, that's a good point. And then with, like we said, not all processed foods are really bad for you. So what you're going to look for is that nutrition label, whether it be on the back, the front, wherever it is on the product that you're buying. And on the nutrition label, at the very bottom of the label, they always have all of their ingredients that they have put in. So the ingredients that are listed first on that label are the ingredients that that food has the most of. So if you see water first, well, then you know that food actually has a lot of water content in it. Thinking of just like the sourdough breads, those are really healthy, and you can tell they're healthy because when you do flip to the back and look at their ingredient list, it literally is just those 3 ingredients. So you're wanting to have less ingredients listed on the food as you're looking at that and noticing what's listed first within those foods, as that's going to be what is what you're consuming more of within that food.
Also, I like to know the ingredients and be able to pronounce them. Anytime you start seeing red 40 or some sort of weird name with a lot of X's and Z's in it, that kind of deters me as well.
Yeah, right? Like that's what you're putting in your body. So making sure you know how to say that or are able to at least research it and see what exactly that food is or that ingredient is that they put into the food. You want to avoid higher salt, or they label it as sodium on nutrition labels, but they tend to put higher salt and sugar in processed foods. So you want to find those that have actually less than 3 grams, less than 5 grams of sugars and 0.3 grams of salt for your ingredients. So as you're looking at the back on the nutrition label, that's what you're aiming for. If the sugars is higher than 5 grams, then you know this food is really not that good for you. Same with the salt content. If it is higher than 0.3 grams, then you might want to reconsider a different brand of that food. So it's not necessarily that you can't have that processed food. Some of them maybe we need to eliminate, yes, but there are other brands out there that may have created a healthier version of that food. So something to kind of look at too. Different brands will have different ingredients that they put in the same foods. For the total fat on the nutrition label, you want to aim for 3 grams of fat or less. And then the saturated fat on your labels, you're aiming for 1.5 grams. Or less. Sugar, as I said, 5 grams or less, and salt 0.3 grams or less. So just really, it's important to look at those labels to see what's listed as ingredients in those foods that you're buying, and how much of these sugar, salt, sodium, saturated fat, total fat is actually being put into our foods.
All right, great information there. I want to talk a little bit about the health risks of eating ultra-processed foods. Obesity, obviously, is one of them. Processed foods often have high caloric density with little nutritional value, so that contributes to a lot of weight gain right there. Heart disease, many processed foods contain trans fats, saturated fats, added sugars, salts, as my wife had mentioned, which can increase the risk of heart disease. Diabetes, the high sugar content in processed foods can lead to insulin resistance, a precursor to type 2 diabetes. Cancer, some studies suggest a link between processed foods and certain types of cancer, such as colorectal cancer. So, got to treat your body good, put healthy foods into it that it can actually utilize and turn into energy. High blood pressure, salt can contribute to that. High in sodium, hypertension. So that's, as my wife mentioned there, you want to try to avoid those salty foods. And when you're reading those labels in the back. Also, cognitive decline. Research indicates a connection between high consumption of ultra-processed foods and increased risk of stroke and cognitive decline. So, as we talked about recently in our gut biome video and podcast, very important because that part is also linked to your brain and how you think and those type of things. So my wife got into a lot of the meals and all those type of things, what to look for, what to avoid. So some great healthy alternatives are whole grains. So that would be your brown rice, your quinoa. Finally said it right, it's not quinoa. Whole grain pasta instead of white rice or refined pasta. We like to do whole grain pasta any chance we can get. And there's also some other good healthy alternatives out there as well. Fresh produce. So as my wife talked about going to the grocery store, all your fresh produce, fruits, veggies, all those type of things. Lean proteins are a good healthy alternative. So fresh meats, poultry, fish, rather than those processed red meat products. I love a good steak, but try to limit it to about maybe 2 or 3 good steaks a year. Mm-hmm. And then we've also tried the healthy alternatives, the plant-based alternative. For example, tonight we'll be making some Impossible burgers, which as someone who's eaten meat their whole life can tell you that those Impossible burgers taste pretty much the same as the red meat unhealthy alternative there. So home cooking is very important. So anytime you can buy the ingredients and come home and make your meal, that's going to be much less processed than anything that's prepackaged or also fast food. Definitely want to avoid any fast food spots as much as you can, but everything in moderation. Don't forget to give yourself a treat every now and again, once every 6 to 8 weeks. If you like McDonald's, have it. Healthy snacks, so that would be your nuts, seeds, fresh fruit. So try to keep those on hand and reach for those rather than anything that's processed or packaged. So as my wife mentioned, not all processed foods are bad. So, you can get those canned veggies as long as there's not added any kind of additives to it. Also, you can do beans, so any kind of canned beans. Try to reach for those organic options. They have plenty of organic pinto beans, black beans, all those type of things. Also, your frozen fruit and frozen veggies, as long as they haven't added any additional syrups or any kind of anything like that. So that is what we had for you on processed foods. I think we do have a challenge for everybody, replacing cereal.
Yeah.
Want to get into that?
Really just replacing one of your foods, and most importantly, I would say looking at the nutrition label on the backs of our foods or wherever it is on our food, and making that change if we're seeing there's too many ingredients listed in the bottom. So make that a goal of yours this week. Try to find or replace a food to a healthier alternative.
All right. Don't forget to hit that plus symbol, the follow button on this podcast so you never miss another episode. Check us out on YouTube and also Instagram, Superhumanistic on everything. Thank you for joining us. And remember to go out, take one new step today toward a healthier life.
Bye.